Hello everyone, so Gaming is the second upcoming character that is going to be released in Genshin Patch 4.4 alongside Shen. Now there's no way this guy is beating the gaming allegations. I can't believe his name is just spelled gaming in English, it's actually hilarious. But as much as I find calling him gaming very funny, I will pronounce his name the intended way. So I wanted to talk about how strong he's looking to be, his potential teams, and his general play style. Again, I just want to preface everything. We don't have anything official yet, nothing official has been released other than just the introduction of the character, but I think it'll be interesting to assume a kit. I have a kit in mind, it may or may not be true, but I'm just going to base all of my subsequent discussion on that assumption. So with that, let's get right into it. Gaming is a Pyro 4-star Claymore, and his main intended role is going to be a main DPS. The quickest summary I can give is just Pyro Xiao. He has a base attack of 302, which is actually fairly high for a 5-star. It's only one under Shenhe, for example, and he ascends off attack percent. So first things first is the skill. When Gaming uses his skill, he just moves forward, wears a little lion head while he does it. This dash doesn't actually do damage, however. So the thing you want to do is after using your skill to kind of dash forward, you want to jump, and that way you'll gain height, and then you can perform a plunge attack. And this enhanced plunge attack from the E is what the skill damage is. When performing this E plunge, he consumes 15% of his max HP, and one of his talents makes it so that whenever he hits an enemy with his enhanced plunged, he gains 10% HP. So overall, every single E plunge that you do will be a minus 5% HP difference. And overall, I think it takes around 1.5 seconds to plunge, maybe a little bit less time. Multiplier looks alright. HP consumption wise, he can't go below 10% HP, and his skill has a 6-second cooldown. Pretty simple, and you'll see that this is pretty much the core ability of Gaming, and most of his damage will be coming from this E plunge damage. So you'll want to level this up first and pretty much ignore the normal attack. Next up, his ultimate. So when Gaming ults, he kind of summons a little lion companion to instantly deal damage in front of him in a circle. He heals 30% of his max HP, and he goes into an enhanced state for 12 seconds. Now after the little lion companion spawns after the explosion, the companion moves a little bit further and then goes back to Gaming. And this takes around 2 seconds, maybe a little bit less. And this is the important thing. So when the lion companion returns back to Gaming, his skill cooldown is reset. Then while you're in the state, if Gaming is greater than 50% HP and he performs an E plunge attack, he spawns this line again, and then he can theoretically go through a loop where your skills CD is reset, you plunge attack, you spawn the lion, and then once the lion comes back to you, you get your E again, and then you repeat the process. Now I believe that lion also spawns if you just E into nothing and just do the forward dash, but let's be honest, in combat you're going to plunge attack. Multipliers here are shown. The ult instant damage is decent, as a 60 energy cost burst, and like I said, 12-second duration with a 15-second cooldown. Now with how support cooldowns work, it's hard for me to see actually ulting every 15 seconds, so I think it's fine to just extend it a little bit, maybe around 18 or even 20 seconds just to get your support skills and ultimates set up. Now knowing both his skill and ult, we can see that his main combo for dealing damage is ulting and then getting reset so that you can constantly skill plunge within a rotation. Now I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, because just thinking about timings between when the companion gets back to Gaming and how long the plunge attack takes is different. Like I said before, estimated around 1.5 seconds for plunge attack and 2 seconds for the companion returning. The difference in timing, especially when we're not in game, makes it kind of hard to develop a rotation that you can do to ensure that you can properly loop and get your resets on your skill. Now I think I've came up with a possible tentative rotation, and this assumes that whenever you press your E, the skill goes on cooldown, not after you plunge. So what I came up is, in order to properly loop, first you would ult, then you would wait maybe like half a second before you perform your skill plunge. And this pause allows it so that the companion is able to return to Gaming while he's performing the plunge attack. And because, let's just say he's in the air and his companion returns to him, you'll get the reset on your skill while you're performing your first plunge attack. And then, since the companion already returned to Gaming and he's in the middle of the air, his plunge attack that he first performed with his first E will respawn the companion. So I imagine that this pause in the skill plunge will allow you to properly loop E-plunge, E-plunge. Now, of course, you have to be greater than 50% HP in order to continue doing this. But the most important thing I wanted to just warn you is this is very subject to change, because this type of timing and rotation is heavily determined on just combat in general. The timings that I provided may be inaccurate because I just did some estimations. So the actual timings on when the line companion comes back to you and when you actually finish your plunge attack will vary in combat. Just for instance, maybe when you plunge, you'll move closer to where the companion was moving toward you, which decreases the amount of time that it takes for your companion to get back to Gaming. So like I said, this is just a tentative rotation, very subject to change, but it could be possible that this is how you want to loop. And although the pauses may seem awkward, those timings may be very beneficial if you're looking to run Hydra supports such as Xingqiu and Yelan, where you want to auto attack to a proc to burst. This moment where you want to pause to make sure that the companion comes back to Gaming at the right time allows you to perform that normal attack to apply Hydra. So we can see that HP consumption is actually a very important part of his kit, and one of his talents also kind of supports this idea. So if he is less than 50% HP, he gains 20% incoming healing bonus, but if he's greater than or equal to 50% HP, he gains 20% pyro damage bonus. So pretty much you want to always maintain greater than 50% HP because one, it gives you the pyro damage bonus, and number two, it allows your line companion to respawn if you perform an E-plunge. Like I said before, his other talent is the heal whenever he hits an E-plunge, and his last talent is 10% movement speed during the day. Whoopee. Next, I wanted to quickly cover his constellations, which is especially important because he's a 4-star. So C1, when the ult companion combines back with Gaming, he heals 25% of his HP. And this is just nice. It's just extra healing, so he is able to maintain greater than 50% HP to perform more plunges and get more damage bonus. C2, any overhealing that Gaming receives, he will gain a 20% attack buff for 5 seconds. Extra damage, very cool. You will not always overheal, I'm predicting, but there are definitely cases where you will, especially if you have a proper healer. C3 gives 3 levels to a skill. C4 makes it that whenever you perform the E-plunge, it gives 2 energy on hit, so nice for energy requirements. C5 increases the burst level by 3, and his C6 gives his E-plunge 20% crit rate, 40% crit damage, and a larger AoE, which is great for his DPS. Now the biggest thing that I can see with these constellations is that sure, I think all of the constellations help him a little bit in his damage. For example, C1, C2 gives him a little bit of buffs, C4 gives just the energy buff, and C6 of course is the highest damage gain, right? But none of these constellations screams to me like, oh, you need to have this constellation, otherwise he's unplayable, or he's losing a lot from his kit. Since all of these constellations are basically just damage buffs, his kit is perfectly fine at Z0. You don't need, for example, C4 or C6 for him to actually perform his role. I think the one constellation that could be considered like really good and you should aim for is actually C1. That way, whenever you finish plunging attack and just consume HP, you can kind of self-sustain some of that HP drain whenever the companion comes back to you. And with a proper rotation, it should continually come back to you. And for a 4-star, that's great. I love 4-stars that perform perfectly fine at Z0. And if you happen to get any of his constellations, that's just cool. He just gains more damage. Next, let's go over weapons. Now, for DPS specifically in pre-release, I find it hard to accurately recommend some weapons because it really depends on DPS calculations, and those DPS calculations really depends on how it's actually played in game. So it's very hard to tell with some accuracy. Let's just go over some of the 4-stars that I clicked on, like Blackcliff Slasher, Serpent Spine, Lithic Blade, Tidal Shadow, the Melusine weapon. Like all of these have useful stats for DPS. They're like attack percent, maybe some ER, crit rate, crit damage. And the best one for you really depends on how you balance your stats. And even some EM ones I clicked on, Mailed Flower, this one, and even Rain Slasher, like I don't think they're that bad if you were able to take advantage of the EM and the passive. So unfortunately it's hard for me to say, oh, I would recommend this one. I think the only one I could say for certainty is Serpent Spine, because Serpent Spine is always strong on any single Claymore DPS. And if you don't get the battle pass, then probably the best free to play option would be either Tidal Shadow or this Melusine weapon. And even Mailed Flower could be pretty good as well. As for 5-star weapons, like I said before, hard to tell, depends on calculations, and I've actually clicked on all of these and I don't think any of them really like synergizes well with his kit. Like there's like normal attack buffs, charge attack buffs, but he doesn't do anything like that. There's no plunge attack buff in any of these. So I hate to be vague, but just choose your best stat stick that helps your stats. It could be Red Horn, it could be Wolves Gravestone, it could be Skyward Pride for ER, who knows. Next, let's talk about artifact builds and stats. He's a pyro DPS. It's pretty simple. I think the baseline that you want to go for is attack, pyro damage, and crit. Now there are some substitutions you can definitely make. Number one, if he is able to consistently vape in your team, you can definitely use EM Hourglass. And if you are using Gaming with Farina, then it is a possibility where you just forget about the pyro damage bonus goblet, and you can go EM and attack on both the Hourglass and the goblet. I don't think you should go like attack or EM. I think you should probably have one of both. Now in terms of artifact sets, I think that he has plenty of HP drain and healing in his inherent kit that Marchuse Hunter is probably going to be the best on him. And keep in mind that with his HP drain and changing, he's likely going to be paired with Farina, and with Farina, you definitely want to go Marchuse Hunter. So definitely aim for a 4 set of that. Otherwise, other 4 sets that I saw that could work are 4-piece Crimson Wish, 4-piece Shimenawas, and even maybe 4-piece Vermilion. And of course any 2-piece that increases his damage. But it's kind of hard for me to recommend those sets when you can just farm for Marchuse Hunter, which is a great set and a great domain. Lastly, let's go over his possible teams. Now I think the best way to kind of visualize your team choices is just look at the classic Xiao team, because he pretty much works like Xiao. So a typical Xiao team right now consists of Xiao, Farazan, Bennett, and Zhongli. So first things first, Gaming takes Xiao's spot, and we kick out Farazan. As a pyro character, you can consider the reactions that they could perform, such as Overload and Melt, but with the supports that we have right now for Cryo and the annoyingness of Overload knockback, I think we'll focus on vaping, so just Hydro supports. With its HP drain mechanics, it seems like a no-brainer that Farina will be the best slot. Next, let's consider Zhongli. So Zhongli provides resistance to interruption, which is very helpful for Xiao and will definitely help Gaming. However, because Gaming already gains a little bit of resistance to interruption whenever he is in his ult, the resistance to interruption isn't that needed, but we can still consider his team building with a shield. You could consider C6 Toma. It gives him plunging attack bonus, gives him that shield, and it also provides pyro resonance and just pyro particles, which helps with both Gaming and Toma's energy requirements. But we'll just stick with Zhongli for now. He works perfectly fine. Now the last slot is the healer slot. Now Bennett in this slot works perfectly fine. Nice buff and provides pyro resonance and pyro particles. However, with Farina, and because Gaming is a plunge attack oriented character, the best slot definitely has to be Xianyun because of her massive buff to plunge attacks. If you want to know more about what Xianyun does, you can take a look at my other video. So now we have a good setup for a Gaming team. Now the one concern I have for this team is whether or not Gaming can actually consistently vape all of his plunge attacks with just Farina as your sole Hydro, because you have potential from Crystallize to remove the Hydro Aura, and because Xianyun has a coordinated animal attack, who knows, maybe the Swirl will remove the Hydro Aura. Now this may not be the case, maybe Farina is just perfectly fine to allow consistent vapes on Gaming's plunge attacks. But if you want to be consistently safe, then we can go double Hydro in the team. And for that, we would have to replace Zhongli with either Yelan or Xingqiu. Yelan obviously providing more damage bonus, but Xingqiu gives that valuable resistance to interruption. And just a side note, if you don't have Farina, then you can just go Yelan Xingqiu. Maybe even one of them is enough to sustain Hydra, who knows. But with at least one of those 2 units on the team, you pretty much have to normal attack, otherwise there's no point in using them. And this is where, like I said, that pause that I considered in that tentative rotation comes into play. Because it seems like you may want to take a breather in order to time your plunge so that you'll get the reset off of your enhanced state ult, you have time to weave in an auto attack so that you can apply either Yelan or Xingqiu's off-field Hydro. And with their off-field Hydro application, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to consistently vape his plunge attacks. And I think that's pretty much everything that I envision team building with Gaming will be. In my opinion, best teammates are definitely Farina and Xianyun, with the last slot being either a shielder for resistance to interruption, or if the Hydro is not enough, one of the other Hydro supports. So with that, let's conclude with how strong I think he'll be, and how his potential teams match up with other teams. Now, like I alluded to when I was talking about weapons, I think it's hard to kind of judge a DPS's strength in the pre-release, because their strength really depends on their damage. So we'll definitely have to wait for some solid calculations done with some good assumptions. But even with that, I would say it's still hard to judge, because when you get in game, the rotations that they calc for may not be the same, the assumptions that they calc for may not be the same. So it really hinges on how his teams play out in the actual game. But although it's difficult to judge a DPS character's strength right now, I do have hope and do believe that Gaming will be a very solid DPS. And the reason being is that his best supports and his best teams have some of the best characters in the game. You have Farina, you have possibly Yelan or Xingqiu, or even both. You have Xianyun, which massively buffs plunge attacks. And with those characters and his ability to vape, I'm actually pretty confident that he'll be a solid DPS and his teams will do good damage per rotation. My one concern that might make his teams not very strong is his plunge multiplier on his E-plunge. It's okay, but it's definitely not the highest. There is a chance that this multiplier might not be good enough as his main source of damage, and you need C6 for those massive buffs to his E-plunges. But I think the most important thing is that, to me, his kit looks really fun. And on top of that, just how he looks when he deals damage is just amazing. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover about Gaming. Feel free to discuss or ask questions in the comments. If you enjoyed my analysis, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.